From FingerLakes1.com, you're listening to episode number 94 of the Inside the FLX podcast. I'm Josh Durso, and today we have a lot to talk about. Assembly Minority Leader Brian Kolb is here in studio a little more than a month after announcing his candidacy for governor. We're going to talk about Albany, the Finger Lakes, his campaign, and much more. Leader, thanks a lot for being here.
Always a pleasure, Josh.
All right, I got to ask, how's the last month in, what would be 12 or 13 days probably? What's it been like?
It's been phenomenal in a lot of good ways.
Yeah.
Certainly, I always consider myself pretty busy before I announced that I was going to seek the Republican nomination for governor. However, it's been very, very gratifying, exciting, the outpouring of support, especially people that actually know me and that I've served in our region here in the greater Rochester area. People have been just absolutely fantastic. And of course, that provides a lot of additional energy and fuel that you need to keep working 24/7. But certainly it's been a great experience so far, and hopefully it'll continue. I know there will be bumps and grinds along the way, but that's part of what a political campaign is all about.
Now, you have started gaining some support from Republican committees. That layer of it must feel pretty good, knowing that you did just announce last month, and this is a long process, and they could have started to wait a little longer.
Well, that's certainly the case. In fact, I think today my team put out an announcement that I received the endorsement of Seneca County Republican Committee today, or they put out the release today.
I had just gotten that email moments before you got here.
Oh,
so
terrific.
Confirmed.
So, thank you. And received Yates County. And next week, I think we have either 6 or 8 more county chairs that are going to announce their support for my candidacy. And then I'm certainly working on this right along the way. But it obviously, it's key because to get the Republican nomination, you have to have the support of the county Republican committees and the state committee men and women that serve on the state committees as well, because they're the ones that eventually vote as to who our nominee is going to be.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about how the Republican Party is united in that there will be no primary. Like, this is going to be a serious effort to unseat Governor Cuomo. How important is that aspect of this to run a successful bid and have that true unity at the party level and also within residents and taxpayers?
Well, I think you have to have unity from a standpoint of it's a very tough state to win in as a Republican. We're certainly outnumbered in terms of registration, but we're certainly not outnumbered in terms of the amount of passion and energy and enthusiasm for promoting a different pathway for the future of New York, and I think we can unite in that regard. And so eventually this is really going to be about the residents, the families, the businesses, all those folks that are part of New York State. This is about our future today and also the future of everyone going forward, and I think that's why it's such an important part to be part of, and hopefully people will get involved. They'll volunteer, they'll write letters, they'll get on social media, watch and repeat podcasts as long as they go well, that sort of thing. So it's going to be very important.
Now, Governor Cuomo has, during his budget address and also during his State of the State, he painted a rather optimistic picture of the way things are going in New York State, especially with some of the infographics that he was throwing up on the screen as he was speaking. But a lot of people don't feel that way. A lot of people feel that the state's wasting a lot of money on economic development, investing in the wrong ways. What is your take on the development that has happened, and how can it be better? What reforms can sort of improve New York State to bring it and make it a little more competitive?
Well, there's a couple things I want to touch upon immediately, and that's what you said, is that people don't feel things are so great.
Yeah.
And that's what's important, is how the residents and the businesses that live here, pay taxes here, how they feel about the direction of the state. Yeah. And no amount of infomercials, paid media, pretty pictures on the wall will sell the fact of how people feel about their property tax bill, their utility bill, what it costs to go to school here. The list goes on. And so what I've shared with people just statistically, and this is factually, this is not a Brian Kolb number, this is a third-party testimonial. Yep. We are the 50th worst state in taxes. We're the 49th worst in economic climate. We're the 48th worst in state debt. We're the 47th worst in property taxes. We've lost over 1 million people that have left our state since 2010. Those are not politics or politic statistics. Those are real numbers. And that's what we're really talking about here. And I do believe, segueing into the economic development programs, look, I think I know as much about economic development as anyone because I've owned my own business in New York State. I've worked for startups, small, mid-sized, large companies. So I think I know a little bit about what it takes to create jobs, and certainly the oppressive regulatory environment that we have through state agencies. They're not focused on customer service. They're really focused on taxing, fining, harassing, whether it's a local hospital, nursing home, auditors coming in, certainly the Department of Health. And it's not that we shouldn't be doing things right. I'm all for doing things right, but it's over the top.
Right.
And when it comes to spending the taxpayer money, I think we should be a guardian of that money. And if we have to create an incentive program, well, let's make sure it's transparent. Everybody sees what we're spending it on and how we're spending it. But right now, the final decisions on even all the economic development projects that are rolled out by the governor are his hand-picked projects. And some of these are political. They may create a short-term construction job, but it's not a long-term employment job, which is a key difference here. Sustainable economic growth where you're creating jobs that are going to be here not just for a construction time period or the summer months, it's all year round. And I think that we should put these programs under the microscope because we're all paying for it through taxes. We're not talking millions, we're talking billions of dollars, and it's about accountability and it's about transparency. And this administration has not been key on those two topics.
Now, you just keyed on a bunch of things that I think are really relevant to this next little topic. Amazon will not be bringing their second headquarters to upstate New York. What did you make of the frenzy around this so-called bid process where all these incentive packages and all these ideas were flowing out there about how to attract a company like that here? And how did that contrast with what we really heard on the ground and in especially these smaller rural communities? Why isn't New York State putting that kind of focus and attention on all of the small businesses that can potentially help New York State in a lot of great ways?
Well, that's exactly the point. When you look at the people that pay taxes here, businesses that pay taxes here, and that's with the Startup New York program. Initially, I said, well, I'm willing to try almost anything.
Yeah.
But then when you got into how the program didn't work, and we were spending, 55, 60, $70 million, and most of it was advertising, not the creation of jobs, well, then it's time to put an end to that program. Okay. And certainly what businesses were saying as that program was being rolled out, which I listened to, they said, look, what about us? We've been here for 50 years paying taxes. We don't get anything. And somebody that hasn't been here now is going to get a tax break, or their employees are going to tax break, which is going to be non-competitive. And this is what I mean, that you have to listen to the people in the street, so to speak, at home, in our communities, versus just doing rollout press conferences with big splashes of a podium. And it's just people feel detached. And that's really what's going on. And now the Amazon bid, New York City is still in it. They're but the Amazon had top 20 cities, but they're all major cities, with one being in Canada. Who knows how it's all going to work out? New York Economic Development Department in Cuomo has not detailed what has been offered. I'm almost afraid to ask. And certainly, I'm all for creating jobs, but the long-term sustainability of our economy, Josh, is helping small business. It's those that employ from a single entrepreneur up to 100 people. And the more, I would prefer to have 1,000 companies or businesses with 100 employees or less versus one major company, because those major companies have a tendency to move their feet much more quickly in terms of looking for the next best deal, or they get bought out and they get closed down, and then what do you do?
Right.
So, and I think there's not enough focus on how we can help small business in our state.
Now, speaking to that, a lot of small businesses, especially here in the Finger Lakes, are really reliant on our lakes and the health of these lakes, especially Seneca Lake, Canandaigua Lake, excluded from Cuomo's proposal. What do you think? Is there any chance that the governor does eventually get into a mood where he's willing to consider adding those lakes, or can the two chambers, manage to work this out so that they are included?
Well, of course. I think we just have to put public pressure, and it's not just the Chamber of Commerce. I've talked to Senator Pam Helming about it. We're united to say these lakes should be included in the algae. The algae is the algae. Yeah. And it doesn't matter where the lake is.
It hasn't discriminated.
Correct. And so we need to funnel resources there as well. So, but I think it's also all the communities that and the residents that surround these lakes should be sending the message to Governor Cuomo as well. Hey, look it. This is not a Democrat-Republican thing. We're talking about the lifeblood of our future and our natural resources, and every lake should be included. Have no idea why he excluded them, but we're going to try to change that.
How much have you seen as far as that goes? Because we tend to hear it a lot, the frustration with the way Albany and New York State sort of systemically run boils well beyond just the traditional party lines of Democrat, Republican. There is a lot of overlap.
Well, it goes without saying. I mean, we have a big state. We have a diverse state. Yeah. And obviously some of our issues in the Finger Lakes, we have the Finger Lakes. Well, other parts of our state don't, in terms of the enormous resource that they are. In tourism. Well, certainly tourism is important in Buffalo when you have Niagara Falls or the Catskills or the Adirondacks, all of our ski resorts, and there are so many things, but each region of our state, Josh, is pretty unique but diverse, similar but different. Mm-hmm. And so that's the toughest part, is there isn't a one glove fits all fix for everything. Mm-hmm. You really have to look region by region to look at their strengths, where they could use some help, what specific strategy should we take advantage of in terms of their resources or their capabilities. Mm-hmm. And that's something where I think people don't see that happening. Mm-hmm. They just see somebody running around and say, well, here, I'm going to announce $5 million, $10 million, without really having a bigger picture about what the overall plan is.
Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, if you are successful in becoming the next governor of New York State, you will have to represent downstate and upstate. What is the trick to balancing both appropriately so that the entire state is successful and doesn't succeed at the expense of the other?
Well, you don't pick winners and losers. Mm-hmm. And you're attentive to each region's individual needs. Mm-hmm. I travel a lot as part of my job as the minority leader. I have an office in New York City. Certainly if you said right now, if you're a commuter in New York City, what's your biggest headache right this second? It's not property taxes. It's the subways running on time. Mm-hmm. And they're not. You've got a petty feud going back and forth in a one-upmanship game between the governor of this state and the mayor of New York City, one of the largest cities in the world. Mm-hmm. And this is just childish, because who suffers in their political games? It's the residents, it's the businesses, it's the taxpayers. And that sort of approach has to disappear. But Governor Cuomo, does involve himself quite a bit in petty politics. He's very vindictive, and he'll do anything to poke you back if he can, and he does. And then sometimes he has other people do it, so his fingerprints aren't on it. That's not the way to govern. You have to govern I got to work together with everybody: Democrats, Republicans, downstate, upstate, Southern Tier, Western New York, Hudson Valley, the North Country, Central New York. I mean, the approach has to be, I'm going to do everything to help everybody. Yeah. But you also then have to say, okay, what's our spending priorities? Mm-hmm. And how are we going to spend the money that we do have in the state? How can we spend our money more efficiently? Maybe to free up money that we can put more money into education or our libraries or our roads and infrastructure. That's an overall, it's an attitudinal approach about, number one focus is trying to help everybody in our state succeed and hopefully prosper. Mm-hmm. And so eliminate the geographic boundaries per se, but understand that each region has got its own needs.
Yeah. Now, obviously, you've been around a while, and you've sort of seen all of this grow, and especially the spending grow. Where do you think the biggest waste is currently in New York State, spending-wise?
Well, I don't think it's any one
particular area.
I think, and I've been in business, and also even folks that are listening, they've got their household budgets. Basically they're saying, look, I've got so much money coming in, and what am I going to do with that money coming in? Am I going to put somewhat in the savings account, family vacation maybe, maybe a new car, whatever, a different home. You plan those things out. Mm-hmm. And, now the budget, with federal spending coming in and state spending, we're up in the 160 plus area. Yeah. There has not been one mention about reducing the cost of government. And I'm not talking about cut, slash, and burn, throw people that are receiving much needed services that they don't get those services anymore. It's just about how to better spend those dollars. I'll give you one example. And it's scary, but it's one example. Medicaid is one of our largest programs, or largest expensive programs in the state. It's designed for low-income folks with developmental disabilities, people that really need a helping hand from government, right? Great program conceptually.
Right. How
it's run is awful in terms of its efficiency and how we spend dollars. And the one example, I was down in New York City last week, and a gentleman shared with me his wife works in healthcare in the New York City area. They have a Medicaid patient that needs transportation from their home or apartment to the health center to get their treatment. Well, for Medicaid to pay for their transportation, they insist that the patient has to take an ambulance from their home to the healthcare center. If they take a cab, they won't pay for it. So instead of paying for a $20 cab fare, Medicaid, they pay a $900 ambulance fee. And this is when you take a step back and say, this is just lunacy.
It's insane. Yeah.
That's the sort of evaluation I think every program that we spend state taxpayer dollars on should go through. Mm-hmm. And it's not about removing services from people in need. It's about really making sure that the dollars are best spent.
Now, obviously, you start talking about the quote-unquote dysfunction of Albany. Do you really think right now we just are seeing the beginning stages of the Joseph Prococo corruption trial? Do we think that this can actually be the catalyst to real change on that reform side? Because the corruption in Albany, unfortunately, is just kind of they're two words that are married together at this point. How is that going to change? Is that shift, can it really happen in the next 2 to 3 years?
I think it can if the legislature and the governor really want to be serious and do something about it. Mm-hmm. The governor created his own Moreland Commission that was supposed to look into corruption. He was going to take on corruption, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the Moreland Commission was looking at a lot of different things, but all of a sudden some of the sites were aiming in on his administration. What's he do? He closes it down because they're now starting to look at the policies that he conducted. Mm-hmm. The guy that's on trial right now, Joe Prococo, was his closest aide. All this is tied up to money that was given out through the economic development programs based on who you knew on the inside, not what the clarity and importance of the project was. We're going to have trials, at least what they're saying right now, from January to maybe through June and beyond. And it's not just Joe Prococo. It's Elaine Calieros, who headed up SUNY Poly. You've got the developers that were involved in the Buffalo Billion, so on and so forth. And the retrial of Shelley Silver's coming up. Mm-hmm. And I sit back at how much more do you need, folks?
All the evidence is there.
All the evidence is there that collectively we've got to change. And even Kolb, which was an ethics commission that is set up, has political appointees. The governor has more, and then 2 majorities, and everything sort of, I don't think, have done a very good job with their independence from the governor's influence or the majorities in both houses. So, in fact, the appointee I had who did a great job. Everybody told me he did a great job. He said you wouldn't believe the interference that came from the outside for those that got appointed by those who appointed them and trying to influence their work. Now, my guy, I never called him once in terms of saying, hey, David, I need you to, look this or look deeper. None of that. But this is an epidemic. It's systematic about a system that is just bad at every turn because it's on insider information, who you know, how much money. You look at the amount of money that Andrew Cuomo's raised as governor. He's sitting on over $30 million. He's got more money than any other Democrat governor in the country. Back when all the people were up in arms about the proposed tax reform bill in Washington. Where was Andrew Cuomo? Instead of being in Washington at the footsteps of the Senate and the Congress and the President, he was out raising money in Hollywood because they get Hollywood tax credits. And it's not just for movies, it's for TV studios, et cetera, et cetera. And, that's that's almost $500 million a year. Yeah. So now think about this. You're a small business in the Finger Lakes or any part of our state. You're struggling to make payroll. You're struggling to pay your taxes. And so because Andrew Cuomo can go out and raise a couple $1 million in contributions, now people that are getting tax credits and benefits that don't live here and don't work here every day with their families. It's just wrong. It's a pay-to-play system. It has to change, but you have to have people that are going to change it. And I think it's pretty clear that Governor Cuomo hasn't been interested in leading the charge.
Now, I want to get your opinion on, because one of the things that we hear from local elected officials, particularly in scope of the Shared Services Initiative, a lot of fear seems to be broiling with more of these programs that come out, that state reimbursement is often tied to executing the various steps that the governor, that the chambers ultimately propose and execute. How much of a problem is that when you start connecting these, it's almost like a fear tactic, to local officials just executing their daily job?
Yeah, it's intimidation. And this is the attitude of, I know better than you do at the local level. The governor saying, I know better, I can tell you what to do, you're going to do it, or you're not going to benefit because you're not following what I want you to do. Local government is responsive to folks that live locally, whether it's a school board, village board, town board, county board of supervisors, county ledge, doesn't matter. They're the ones that have to answer back to their constituents. And if they're the ones that have to respond to whatever tax levy they're putting out there or they're spending, it's up to them not to have interference from the state or the federal government. And I think it's arrogant for someone in Albany that doesn't live in Ontario County or Seneca County or Yates County to say, I know better than your local officials, and they're going to do it my way, or I'm going to punish them because they don't.
Now, last topic before we get you out of here. I know you are very busy. Domestic violence. Talk to us about the package of proposals that your conference was able to put forward recently. I believe that just came out in the last couple days. I just recently saw that headline. How important with things like Brittany's Law and all these different initiatives across the state that have been trying for years to get movement on domestic violence and creating some actual meaningful reforms, how important is this sort of package deal where this might finally be the time when this can get pushed all the way through?
Well, first of all, I'm going to reemphasize we held domestic violence forums across the state. Our conference did. We put out the report. We've come up with recommendations, but we received those recommendations from victims of domestic violence, advocacy groups, support centers, and we think it's pretty comprehensive in scope that has absolutely zero political overtones. There's nothing partisan about it. And, Brittany's Law, in fact, Dale Driscoll, who's done such great work trying to advocate for Brittany's Law, she said, if we can get this package of things actually accomplished, she said that would make her day, and she believes that that's major steps in all the right direction.
Yep.
So we just have to put our effort behind it. We said yesterday or 2 days ago at our press conference, we said, well, we don't want this to be a partisan thing. We want everyone to jump on board and say, okay, because it wasn't so much our ideas. We compiled the ideas and solutions from those that are really living and breathing it. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the statistic, that's horrifying, that 1 out of 4 women are victims of domestic violence in our state. That's just scary. So I'm hoping that these ideas and proposals and additional funding for domestic violence centers and all that we're talking about, because it's a serious issue, a real issue, and it's a quality of life issue for the people of our state.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming in. I know you're super busy. Best of luck in the next several weeks and months as you continue down this journey.
Well, thanks, Josh. Always a pleasure to be with you, and look forward to the next time.
Absolutely. Well, that is going to do it for us today. I'd like to thank Leader Kolb, our listeners, and, of course, FingerLakes1.com for making this podcast possible. Inside the FLX airs Sundays at 7 p.m. on Spectrum, channel 1304, and is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the FingerLakes1.com app. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time.